Hi, Chris.
Big announcement from the Prime Minister today that as of December the 1st, that international students and people on working visas can come into the country. Up until now, it's only been Australians coming home. So this is the next step of opening up those borders. You must be wanting to know, or do you know already, have they got a date ready for overseas tourists to start coming back into Australia?
Well, look, just dealing with the international student and the skilled workers piece in the first instance, to be brutally frank, Chris, if we don't get those students and skilled workers in, we're not going to be able to meet tourism demand when people do start travelling for tourism purposes again. So it's really critically important that this one gets up and running and that there is sufficient time for those students and others to work their way into the employment system. I have to say that in terms of leisure tourists, Australians, in terms of leaving the country, unless they're going somewhere to visit friends and relatives, are showing themselves to be a bit reluctant to leave because they're sort of looking at it and going, oh, that looks a bit hard. I think possibly international travellers will be thinking the same thing about coming here. And I also think so long as we don't have certainty about the other state borders, we're a bucket list visitation. If you're coming here, you want to be able to do everything, not have to argue over domestic borders that are still closed and therefore not be able to see things you want to see.
Well, that's the point. How do you welcome a tourist from Europe or from North America, say, come into Sydney, and at the moment they can't go to Queensland or Western Australia, and heaven knows probably not the Northern Territory either. So it's a pretty hard sell at the moment.
It's a very hard sell. Tourism Australia is giving it its best shot. And look, Sydney's a great place to come. So is Melbourne. So is all the regional communities around us. But the bottom line is, if you're coming here, you want to be able to do the Great Barrier Reef, Uluru. You need to maybe go to Mingaloo, the Barossa, whatever else. And you need the certainty to know that you can do those things. Now, more to the point, international airlines are not going to up their capacity of flights into Australia if they can't be certain that you're going to be able to do all of those things. So the states remaining closed is actively retarding the rebirth of international travel into Australia and the revenue that comes from those tourists.
Well, let me try and be positive here, because I tell you, these state premiers drive me absolutely nuts and I don't think they deserve any credit. But let's be positive and say in Queensland and South Australia at least, they've outlined a plan over the next few weeks to open up their borders. They've got all sorts of permits and testing and whatever. But it's a start, isn't it? You could get to a situation where there's relatively free movement around the country by Christmas everywhere except for Western Australia.
Well, I certainly hope that that does turn out to be the case. And I think that, yes, I do take your point that we are seeing movement, and I'd be the last one in the world not to be grateful for that. However, I think there are still some issues that are going to impact on the domestic marketplace as well as those international pieces. So, for example, if you're going to Queensland, you have to have a PCR test 72 hours before you go, or at least that's what we understand at this point. And that's likely, unless you're prepared to scam the system, to be a test that you have to pay $150 per person for. Now, if you're going to Queensland and you're travelling at perhaps the discount end of the market and you're taking one of our great discount airlines, well, essentially your PCR test could cost you more than the airline tickets. And that's going to be a break on domestic tourism.
Yeah, it's just over the top, totally unnecessary. We've got to keep fighting the good fight. Thanks for joining us, Margy.
Thank you, Chris.
Margy Osmond there.